on how during your rehab to make that a healthier environment. If you want to pull up the guidelines as I'm talking, if you Google HUD Exchange, Health at Home, this document will pop up. There's a URL link in here, and we will obviously send you one when the webinar is done. Michael mentioned our additional intention around health and housing right now with COVID, and I would simply say that in addition to the things Michael pointed out is that we know some poor housing conditions make us increasingly vulnerable for a variety of health outcomes, which are also being linked to folks having a potentially greater risk of having a more severe case of COVID, and those involve respiratory and cardiovascular in particular. So what are a couple of examples that link our home environment to our health? Three we just wanted to point out as examples. One would be asthma. When we look at national data here, about 8% of children, 8% of adults report currently experiencing asthma symptoms. And our research, some of which you'll hear from our wonderful panelists, does tell us that 20 to 40% of asthma attacks can be linked to home conditions. Those home conditions are some of the things that you'll see in the pictures to the right: environmental, tobacco smoke, cockroaches, moisture and mold, dust mites, that's the little creature in the right-hand column in the middle row, and mice and cockroach droppings. And lastly, at the bottom, cooking, which creates particulate matter and a variety of other pollutants, particularly if a combustion gas is being used, like from a gas range. Second example might be radon, where EPA estimates about 21,000 deaths a year can be linked to radon exposures, and that roughly a little over 7 million homes may have radon levels above EPA's threshold. And we'll hear in the guidelines in one of our subsequent sessions on contamination our advice about testing and mitigation around radon that you can build into rehab. And finally, falls. 25%, or 1 in 4 older adults, fall each year, and the data tells us that about half of those falls occur in and around the home. So the way, again, the way in which we do our rehab can reduce all of these risks. Today you're learning about some of the guidelines as they apply to ventilation and creating cleanable surfaces. We have 3 additional sessions, as Michael mentioned, scheduled for July, September, and October, and we will follow up and provide you a link so that you can register for those sessions as well. So who did we write these guidelines for? There were 3 audiences in mind, and I recall the poll Lael put up indicating that a significant portion of you are involved in local programs, and we had you in mind in the drafting. So program managers and staff who work on local rehab standards can define what a healthy housing program standard would look like, or to ensure that your rehab standard includes health elements. Second group would be intake staff, underwriters, case managers who can further customize the standard in conjunction with your participating jurisdiction who might be receiving HUD home funds, subrecipient staff if you're then moving the funds on to another organization where there's additional customization. And finally, the people actually doing the rehab work, construction and rehab specialists who are going to implement what other rehab standard you have and its healthy homes elements, and making choices in that scope of work about what's going to get done and what's not going to get done. We provided the guidelines and tried to write them in a very practical, user-friendly format. And towards that end, we understand that everybody's brain works a little differently, and so we've tried to make the guidelines as accessible as possible. And when I was describing it to Michael, is we really have 2 doors into these guidelines. The first door is we've organized the rehab guidelines under the 9 healthy homes principles, which you see below. They are: keep it dry, keep it contaminant-free, keep it pest-free, keep it well-ventilated, keep it clean, keep it safe, keep it well-maintained, keep it thermally controlled, and build it in a way that people can be active in the way that they use the building. That particular one applies a little more to multifamily. And today we're going to focus on keep it well ventilated and keep it clean. The second door into these guidelines would be, for some of you, you might not think about the specs and the guidance and the content under these principles. You might think about it under as being relevant to building components or systems because that's the way your rehab specs are organized. So we also provide this content using that structure and provide guidelines under each of these home systems or building components, if that's a more familiar or accessible way for you to access the information. And I'm going to show you how both of those look. So the first is, how do we present it when we are providing the information under each of these 9 principles? So I'll show you the example here for ventilation, which we'll talk about today. At the outset, we describe why does this principle matter. I'm not going to read this because Nate's going to give you that wonderful information. So we give you a little of the why statement, and then we have a very pithy, short way of describing the rehab action that we think makes sense under this principle, and wherever we can, if there's more detailed information, we'll provide that in a hyperlink. So here, point source ventilation on kitchen, bathrooms, dryers, exactly what we need, whole house ventilation, and advice around filtration, which we'll hear from Nate about. So this is the way it looks under the principle-based approach. We also have an approach which is related to those building systems. I want to just highlight a few icons that we use in that formulation. For each of those rehab specs, we try to give you that crosswalk. How does it relate to one of the other principles with one of these icons? So if the activity of the repair replacement spec is going to improve indoor air quality, we'll use the blue arrow. If it will reduce other contaminants that might not be in the air but are other contaminants that someone might ingest, say lead dust on a floor, we'll use the yellow. Safety in falls, does it reduce them? Again, the individual looks like they're about to slip, and O&M. For an example, one of the components that we include is appliances, and I just pulled the one here for clothes dryer exhaust. And you can see if you, in the way we present it here, we provide a repair and a replacement standard. You can see those highlighted with my red arrows. And to the right, you'll see those little icons. You can see the repair standard for dryer exhaust, which is really just making sure they're vented to the outside and sealed. That's an O&M type activity, and the replacement standard involving new ductwork would reduce indoor air contaminants so that we don't have moisture coming through that ductwork back into the home or other contaminants. So that's just an example of how it looks, and you can see how it relates to the principles there in the words ventilation and dry. So that's the second door into these guidelines. In addition, the guidelines provide some information about operations and maintenance while you're not doing that in the rehab. That might be materials that you would give to the individual who owns the property, and if it were a rental, that they might also pass on to their renters. We provide some sample handouts about green and healthy building and home products, cleaning products, paints, flooring, things that you might do during operations and maintenance, additional supplemental materials that property owners might use about engaging residents with a variety of web links to additional information, and then obviously a full set of references for those of you who would like to dig deeper into the technical information. I am at this point going to allow us to take that deeper dive into how the guidelines and standards can be used in home rehab. And today, because we're focusing on ventilation, we have our resident ventilation expert, Nate Price, who is with the Indoor Climate Research and Training Group at the University of Illinois. We brought Nate in because he has been providing training to the National Weatherization Program, particularly in the ventilation area, for years, and they've really adopted what we are recommending in these guidelines. And he has extensive experience, not just training, but also doing field inspection to see how things went awry, and has a background himself as a renovation contractor. So I'm going to hand it over to Nate.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Sorry about that. I'm just having a little issue there. But good afternoon, everyone. I really am excited about the opportunity to be here and talk to everybody today about ventilation. When I first got the invitation for this, I was thinking that, this is probably something I could talk about for 3 to 6 hours, but I've been told multiple times to try to limit it to 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to do that. And hopefully I can do that by focusing mainly on some good standard practices that I've seen successful in my field experience, and then also I'm going to highlight a couple things that are a little uncommon that maybe folks aren't seeing every day or wouldn't know to look for otherwise. But before I do any of that, the first thing that I would, do I have the, sorry, I've got, yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, before I get into all the techniques and standards that I want to talk about today, obviously we want to know, why do we ventilate? What are the benefits of proper ventilation? And of course, Ellen mentioned some of the health benefits. I mean, there really has been kind of an evolution as far as how building scientists and contractors and homeowners see ventilation. It kind of started as an occupant comfort issue. We want to install ventilation to reduce odors, and balanced air distribution is going to allow us to heat and cool more effectively, and those things are great. But then we've come to a point where we see reduced energy use as a potential benefit of proper ventilation as well. And that, by that I mean, if you install proper ventilation in a home, that allows you the opportunity to do more air sealing or other retrofit measures that are going to increase the performance of that building shell, and also the HVAC system, which of course is usually the biggest energy user in the home. So, but after these things have been apparent for so long, and one of the things that is becoming more and more apparent, obviously, are the potential health benefits of good ventilation. There are tons of studies out there about health benefits and how ventilation practices can improve them. But the one I'm referring to here it was done in part by folks at the Indoor Climate Research and Training Center where I'm from at the University of Illinois. And what they found is not only were they able to, by just following the ASHRAE standard, which we'll get into a little later, in weatherization homes, they found that they could reduce concentrations of contaminants, mostly including CO2, VOCs, and radon. Formaldehyde wasn't significant reduction, but the others were noticeable. But not only were those contaminants reduced in the indoor air, but they also saw that there was a reduction in self-reported health issues in the residents. So it's something that's actually noticeable, and that's in a fairly quick turnaround, a fairly short amount of time after the ventilation has been installed. So even some of these health benefits can be a little bit more immediate than folks might think. But of course, in order to get those benefits out of ventilation, you have to do it properly, and I think that's exactly why these guidelines were put together, the Health at Home guidelines. It's a really great resource after going through it. I really love how they tie all of the health principles together and show you. They do a great job of showing you not only what good ventilation looks like, but how that relates to other principles like cleanliness or safety and energy efficiency. And it's important to think of the house as a system. So you're going to address everything in the ventilation guidance or guidelines and do all of those things. If you can't just do one thing and think that that's going to improve things, because if you're not treating the house as a whole and doing all of the things, then there's potential to even do more harm than good. So you follow all the guidelines here, and you're addressing different building components. And of course, one thing I always stress is you have to make sure that these things are installed properly. Of course, usually that goes without saying, but it is something that you can mention over and over again and still gets overlooked on occasion. Examples I like to think of, improper exhaust venting. Maybe you've got venting that's exhausting into an attic, that's going to cause moisture issues. Or if you have a furnace filter that's the wrong size or isn't secured tightly, you're going to get air coming in around that furnace filter, and that's going to just completely destroy the effectiveness of that filter. But then not only do we want to do everything on this list in terms of ventilation, but we also want to think about how the ventilation practices we're employing by following these guidelines are impacting other building components or other sections of the home. There's always a potential to overdo some things. We want to make sure that we're not doing something that's going to have a negative impact on that home or the occupants. So some good examples of potential problems might be if you have natural draft appliances in that home and you install too much ventilation, which typically isn't a huge problem, but you might end up having those natural draft appliances spilling combustion gases back into the home because they're not allowed to draft properly. Another example would be if you install a too restrictive filter in a furnace, then you might put increased wear on that furnace blower motor and that, or AC, I guess, any HVAC forced air system, and that increased stress on that motor might end up decreasing the lifespan, and then you're just actually increasing the monetary cost of to the client or the occupants by trying to help. So we want to address everything as a whole, and we want to do everything on the list, but we want to do everything on the list properly. And like I said, the guidelines do a really great job of showing you exactly how all those things tie together, and especially highlighting some of the components or building sections that interact, I guess, more significantly with one another. So a few things that I'd like to highlight just briefly. Dryer vents are something that they're fairly straightforward, but some things that get overlooked. I've got a couple examples here. The first one is this diffuser here in the middle. That's something that I've seen quite a bit on dryer vents, and a lot of times they're advertised as energy saving, which I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but they talk about putting the heat from the dryer back in your house, and that I guess is somewhat true. But not only are they putting the heat from the dryer back in your house, but all of the moisture that is coming out of the dryer is going into the home. And also, if it's a gas appliance, then combustion gases or combustion byproducts are probably entering the home as well. So those things are definitely something you want to get rid of every time, no matter what. And then I've got the termination here on the upper right that is clogged, and that's something, it's fairly obvious if you're looking at a dryer termination whether it's clogged or not. But things that might not be obvious is you might have almost perfectly intact ductwork or that meets the standard or the guidelines, and it looks perfectly fine when you come into a home. But if you don't look inside to see, if it's clogged inside the ductwork, there's a potential for it not to be as effective as it should be. And then the bottom right photo is a broken damper. That's not actually a dryer vent, but it's a good example of what happened in this case was a client had a damper that wasn't closing properly, so they went out and duct tape over that damper. So not only is that appliance not exhausting properly, but it's got a potential to harm the appliance itself. And additionally, if you have broken dampers, especially on dryer vents, they're usually a little bit lower towards the ground, so the potential for pest infiltration is pretty high. HVAC filtration, just briefly on this. One thing that I get asked very regularly is, we have these MERV ratings on the filters, and the higher the MERV rating, the better the filter is, right? And I guess technically that is true. There's this study done at Berkeley National Lab showed that a MERV 14 filter was able to reduce fine particles by 39%, concentrations of those fine particles by 39%. versus a MERV 6 filter, which was reducing those particles by 6%, right? So that would lead somebody to believe, yes, MERV 14, let's go with that every time. But that's not always the case. There's other considerations you have to make. You know, cost concerns, if you're talking about programs that are dealing with low-income clients, which a lot of us are, then that means, you know, those higher MERV rating filters are going to be more expensive. So clients aren't going to be able to purchase those as easily. Also, there's increased maintenance. Those more restrictive filters need to be replaced more often. And then similar to, like I was saying earlier, you can install a filter that's more restrictive and also that could put more stress on the motor, on the HVAC system. So the guidelines, for the Health at Home guidelines here, I think recommend MERV 8 filters, and that's a pretty standard recommendation because it's a great compromise between something that's going to effectively filter the air, and also it's not going to cause a lot of these issues that could potentially end up in damage or harm to the homeowner. So my example here on the right in that photo, that's a homeowner that hadn't changed their filter in 2 or 3 years, and it had clogged up to the point where it was being sucked into the furnace compartment. And if you've got a client that's not going to be, that hasn't replaced their filter for a couple of years, it's going to be hard to expect them to replace one more often than a couple of months. But that's a client education component that definitely we'd like to see employed along with these retrofits, though. Ductwork, so duct sealing, that's generally a good idea no matter what. You're improving efficiency. That's a common reason for duct sealing, but also a couple other reasons. Structural damage is definitely a concern. My photo on the top here is an example of a supply duct leak in an attic. So that supply leak is introducing all this warm, moist air during the heating season into the attic, and that moist, warm air is causing condensation on the underside of that's the roof sheeting there and on the trusses. So you're getting, basically that's going to result in most likely mold and eventually structural damage, so that roof's going to have to be replaced, right? So if those ducts are sealed in time, then we save the homeowner and occupant a lot of headache with structural repairs and roof repairs in the future. And then an example of a reduction in contaminants I've got here on the bottom, and this happens to be the case of a leaky return duct in a crawl space. So basically any of that return air that's getting introduced back into the home is coming from the crawl space. It's going to start introducing most likely moisture from that crawl space, potentially radon. It's also, you know, could introduce insects and other pests. So there's definitely a great opportunity to save some damage there. But the other thing that I often get asked about in regards to ducts is duct cleaning, and that's, you see the advertisements all the time from HVAC contractors, at least I do, and a lot of them contain, you know, they say, hey, we're going to come out and clean your ducts, and they tout the health benefits of that, and that definitely can be the case if you have significant issues in those ducts. Like say you've got a pest infiltration or you've got mold or water damage, and I've seen that before. In those cases, yeah, duct cleaning can be a great benefit. But on the other hand, if you're just doing it as a matter of course, that process can introduce contaminants into the home that weren't there otherwise, either from the solvents that they use for the cleaning or just the act of cleaning itself by brushing that ductwork and bringing those things that have settled in those ducts back into the home, at least for a short amount of time. So. And then the big one is going to be ventilation systems. So what are some options for effectively meeting the ASHRAE standard, which is referred to in the guidelines here, and it's the basic standard for ventilation systems in homes. And here you can see they basically approach it from 2 different angles. They talk about either local exhaust systems or whole house exhaust systems. And in this case, bathroom ventilation is one of the most common ways and cost-effective ways that I've seen programs meet the ASHRAE standard. there's slight differences between if you're going to do a local exhaust and a whole house exhaust. The main one being whole house exhaust, you're talking about something that's going to be running a lot more, so they need to be rated for continuous use. And also, they have a lower sound rating because they don't want that background noise to be distracting or bothering the occupants as much. So you can see there's just slight differences, but for the most part, you definitely want to employ some exhaust in bathrooms, but you've got options to do either or depending on what you need to do to meet that standard. But just to get a little bit more in depth with that, local exhaust, I mean, you're just thinking a typical bathroom exhaust fan, and that's for the most part the case. You can get these fans at most big box stores, and most of the ones that will meet the standards that ASHRAE outlines will advertise that pretty heavily. And it's always good to verify, though. Just make sure that you look at the sound rating and the flow ratings to make sure that they do meet the standard. But these are fairly inexpensive fans. I mean, they're going to be a little bit more expensive than your run-of-the-mill 60 CFM bath fan, but they can run $125, $200. So that's just a little bit more expensive than you typically pay. But they're easy to install. And as far as how they're controlled, you can use just a typical on and off switch, or you can use something like this passive humidistat switch here. And that's basically just a way to regulate the humidity in that room. So it's not up to the occupant to determine whether that fan needs to be on. That fan can automatically turn on when it gets to a certain threshold of humidity, which is primarily what we're trying to address in bathrooms. But then if we want to use that same retrofit or that same measure to instead satisfy the whole house standard, then we've got a couple different options. These fans, like I said, they're going to have a little bit different rating requirements, and they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but the controls are somewhat more automated. So with this particular model of fan, you can use an intermittent switch, and that will basically make sure that the fan runs at least a certain amount of time per hour at a certain flow rate. And but it's still able to be activated by the occupant if they would like. But there's also options to do a continuous flow that's on a motion switch, or so it's going to run all the time at a certain speed, and then it can ramp up to an increased speed depending on if it detects motion or not. And like I said, the prices for these are going to be a little bit more expensive, especially when you start adding like the motion detectors and some of the other fancy options. But they're automated to the point where you don't have to do. Sometimes they can even save money because you might not have to run additional wiring or things like that for your contractors. If you have to put in a different a whole new game box or light switch or things like that, it can save some time and therefore some money, but they are definitely a little expensive up front.
Hey Nate, this is Ellen, just giving you a 2 minutes, 30-second warning.
Okay, like I said, I could ramble on all day. I will finish up with a couple things. Kitchen ventilation, here's your ASHRAE standard for kitchen ventilation. One thing I want to mention about these is just like the other fans, they're going to be a little bit pricier. You can't just go into a store and buy your run-of-the-mill range hood and expect that to meet the standard, but they're not super crazy as far as restricting you to things. So $100, but then you can, if you need to, you can spend as much money as you want on some of these. I've seen some fancy ones that cost $500 or $600. So lastly, you want to make sure that your ductwork's run properly. You want to insulate it. You want to avoid these turns and twists in the ductwork because that's going to restrict the airflow, and it's not going to be your flow is not going to be at the rated flow. Make sure it's properly terminated so you're not getting issues like this where you're exhausting moisture into attic spaces or unconditioned spaces. And then last couple things I want to touch on are some additional options. These are less standard as far as typical practice. That they're not used as much for a couple reasons, but they're great options when you run into situations where you might have some issue installing the typical bathroom fans. Continuous flow range hoods. So these will meet the ASHRAE standard for continuous flow ventilation as a kitchen range hood, which is great. Like I said, they meet all the requirements, and you can install that. And sometimes installing a range hood is 10 times easier than a bathroom fan. So that's a great option. The through-wall fans, if you don't have a ceiling surface to mount the bathroom exhaust fans on, or mobile homes is a great place that I've seen these used, where you have to kind of, the wall's the only place to vent. Inline exhaust fans, they're installed directly in the attic. They can be installed almost anywhere in the home, and they are rated for continuous use, and they satisfy the ASHRAE requirements for continuous use. But then the balanced ventilation system and the HRV and ERV systems, those are something that are going to be a lot more common because they not only exhaust, but also they have an intake, so they're not affecting the pressure on the home as much. And the HRV and ERV systems are even more preferable because they're tied directly into the duct system for the HVAC system, and that's going to help you evenly distribute the air throughout the house, which is a huge deal when you're trying to address ventilation. So I do have some contact information on here eventually, and so if there's anything anybody has questions about, I'm going to get booted off of here, but please feel free to contact me at some point if you want to talk more about ventilation. I'd love to. So, Ellen, I can get it back to you.
Back to me.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Nate. And if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We may not get to them all today, but we'll have a transcript and we'll send you back responses in the follow-up. Our second principle we wanted to touch on briefly today is keep it clean, which honestly I think of as keep it cleanable. We really want to have surfaces in the home that folks can easily clean, and this is even more important now these days when we're thinking about COVID. So we want to be able to clean up allergen, pest dropping, pesticides, and now virus particles. In an appendix that we have on the guidelines, you'll hear about cleaning practices. In terms of rehab, the guidelines in the appendix will talk about cleaning practices, and on our subsequent webinar that we're going to talk about contaminants, we will be diving a little bit more into cleaning practices, specifically with COVID in mind. In terms of what you do in a rehab, we want to focus folks on using durable and cleanable surfaces in high-use areas. So these are floors and entryways, in bathrooms, in kitchens, in entryways, and make sure that those surfaces are easy to clean and last. So there are rating systems around laminate flooring that we note here that shows you the durability. And there are some examples we provide in the guidance when you're making those choices to pick a flooring that has less off-gassing of contaminants to, again, reduce indoor environmental exposures. And just I provide one example here with Floor Score, which is related to resilient flooring. The pictures on the right are obviously a wood floor on the top and a laminate floor on the bottom, which would meet the Floor Score standard and hopefully the laminate floor durability standard. So we really want folks to think about in these wet and high use areas, durable, cleanable surfaces. We have a suggestion at the end of each workday to really use effective job site cleaning. So not just any vac, a HEPA vacuum is definitely preferred because it will filter out more particles. Additional information will be coming in a future session about cleaning practices. So I'm going to keep that short so that I have time to hand this off to Jill, where we'll hear about a multifamily renovation project which addressed ventilation, but was much broader. And Jill will describe for us how that changed indoor environmental conditions in the building and also health. Jill is a certified industrial hygienist who's worked at the National Center for Healthy Housing for over 20 years. And I've had the great pleasure of working with Jill for many decades. She and the center team do some of the best research in the country on affordable housing, renovation, and health. She has a master's from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, where we're hearing a lot from these days in the COVID world. So I'll pass it to Jill.
Thank you, Ellen, for that kind introduction. As Ellen said, I'm here to talk to you about what we called our GREAT case study. GREAT stands for Green Renovation of Elder Apartment Treatments. And you can see the building in the background. That's a post-renovation picture. Although it was a gut rehab, not a moderate one like the guidelines focus on, it is a great, pun intended, example of how well the principles discussed in HUD's new housing rehab guidelines are illustrated and can be applied to the green renovation of this low-income 101-unit apartment building in Mankato, Minnesota, which housed primarily older adults. HUD funded a Healthy Homes technical study that looked at improvement in housing condition and the impact on health due to this large renovation project. And we collected data at both baseline and at 1 year post-renovation. So older adults are more susceptible to adverse housing conditions than younger individuals. First off, because they tend to spend more time indoors at their home. That's not as much the case right now with COVID-19, but certainly under more normal circumstances. They're also more likely to live in older homes. And these older homes might have older heating and cooling systems with no fresh air, and they leak, leading to thermal stress in both the summer and the winter. They can be damp or noisy, stuffy or dark, which can cause anxiety or depression. And they may have been built prior to the Americans with Disability Act or other laws, which may mean that they're difficult to navigate, particularly if a person needs to use a wheelchair or a walker. And people may therefore end up being trapped in their home, or indeed even on just one floor of their home. And they may have many safety hazards due to deferred maintenance. So on this slide, you can see a shot on the left of the building before renovation. And I'm going to talk a bit about the ventilation first, the ventilation principle. And on the pre-renovation side of the slide, you can see that they had a hydronic heating system with individual through-wall air conditioners. This was an exhaust-only ventilation strategy with no mechanical fresh air ventilation. They did have operable, albeit leaky, windows in each apartment that contributed to mold and moisture issues. The windows had basically leaked since the building was built in the early 70s. At post-renovation, they had put in a new heating and cooling system with a central geothermal ground source heat pump that feeds a water loop connected to individual heat pumps in each apartment. And that first picture at the top is a picture of the heat pump in one of the apartments. It also, as part of the renovation, they ducted fresh air supply to each apartment, supplied by rooftop units, which distributed a constant volume of air through ductwork into each apartment. And that's the top picture on the right. This air was continuously exhausted via a bathroom fan that was vented outdoors through powered roof ventilators. And this ventilation was decoupled from the heating and cooling system to provide a more reliable distribution throughout the building. So I did want to illustrate how the other Healthy Homes principles were achieved in this rehabilitation. In picture 1, you can see that's another illustration of the geothermal system. Picture 2 is a picture of a former outdoor balcony, and I'm using this to illustrate the dry principle. The outdoor balcony was too cold and weather impacted for people in Minnesota to access most of the year, so they brought it inside, and they made other building envelope improvements that made the building drier and more comfortable. They replaced all the windows, as you can see in picture 2, many of which had leaked, and they vented dryers and bathrooms to the outdoors. Pictures 3 and 4 are illustrations of the SAFE principle. In picture 3, which is a shot of the kitchen, where they put in ground fault circuit interrupter outlets. They also put these in the bathroom. They installed carbon monoxide alarms. That's a gas stove that you see there in the picture. Another illustration of SAFE is in picture 4, which shows well-lit hallways, and they installed visual cues around every door so that the folks who were visually impaired could more easily locate their apartment. Also in pictures 2 through 4, you can see examples of both cleanable and maintainable principles with bare cleanable floors, and they installed the easy-to-clean surfaces throughout. The final 3 pictures there on the bottom, 5, 6, and 7, are illustrations of the healthy living principle. As I said, because this was Minnesota, they made sure they brought some of the outdoors in. You can see that in picture 5, with wide walking lanes, comfortable places for people to meet. They installed an exercise room with equipment that disabled and older adults could easily use. And they also put in an outdoor walking areas with wide walkways and a covered patio. As far as contaminant-free, I don't have a picture of that, but this is a green renovation. So they used low VOC paint, sealants, adhesives, and construction materials. They did test for radon at the ground level before renovation, but all the samples were at or below the detection limit of 0.4 picocuries per liter, except one, which was at 1.5, which is below EPA's action level of 2 picocuries per liter. Immediately after the rehab was done, commissioning and testing of the primary ventilation system showed excellent outcomes. As far as fresh air ventilation, 100% of the one-bedroom apartments met the 20 CFM design criterion, with 85% also meeting a more stringent 30 CFM criterion. There's just one two-bedroom unit in the whole 101-unit complex, and that one did not meet the design flow rate, but they were unable to figure out a reason why for that one. The apartment exhaust, that continuous bathroom exhaust, the vast majority of units did meet the 25 CFM criterion, with only one failing by more than 10%. And at 1 year post-renovation, they found that there was a nearly 44% reduction in energy use versus pre-renovation. And this is a substantial improvement considering the addition of fresh air to all the units in the building. We also conducted some environmental monitoring as part of this study, and we found that the temperature in both the summer and the winter met the design criteria. It was much more consistent. There was many fewer complaints of thermal stress from the residents in the building. The CO2 levels significantly improved at 1 year post-renovation, and that's obviously, we think, due to the controlled fresh air coming in. We did some measurements of indoor air quality and found no significant change in total volatile organic content or formaldehyde, not surprising since this was a green renovation. And we did some allergen measurements in settled dust and did not find significant levels of those either. Looking at the housing condition at 1 year post-renovation, we found that the significant improvements in the frequency of fan use in both the bathrooms and the kitchen, and substantial improvements in moisture-related issues. And this was a big one because that was a major problem in the building before renovation began. A no smoking policy was instituted at the same time as the renovation, and this finding that tobacco smoke inside the home decreased is due to both the smoking policy and the air sealing of units, because we did find that some people continued to smoke in their units, but the people who lived next door could no longer smell the smoke. All right, finally looking at the health outcomes at 1 year post-renovation, mental health showed improvements based on 2 different measures, and physical health also showed improvements with fewer falls at 1 year post-intervention and improved general physical health. We conjecture that the fall decrease is due to the walkable, more open areas, both inside the apartments and in the common areas. In conclusion, we found greatly improved building and apartments that met these important, critical, healthy homes principles. This led to improved mental health, reduced falls, and improved general physical health, and substantially less indoor smoking. Because this is a package of interventions, we can't link any particular aspect of the renovation to the health findings. But in a similar study, we found a significant correspondence between an apartment's sustained reduction in temperature and improvements in a resident's quality of life, decreased emotional distress, and improved sleep. So I'm pleased to have presented this. I think it's a great example of how the Healthy Homes Rehab Guidelines can help make a home safer and healthier. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jill. We started about 3 minutes late, so I'm going to take the latitude to put forth 2 of the questions that I see in the Q&A to our presenters, and we'll wrap up just a couple minutes late. So Nate, just a question for you. One of the Participants ask, how do you know if ducts need sealing? Unmute yourself, Nate.
Yep, I think you guys can hear me now, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So that's a great question, and it really depends on as a homeowner, you have different options than you would in one program, one of these programs versus a different program. Like for instance, in the weatherization program, we would do duct testing with maybe pressure pan tests or duct blaster testing, and that would give us a really solid number on duct leakage. But in a lot of cases, those aren't options because of costs and time constrictions. So another alternative would be to consult an HVAC contractor or some other type of energy auditor that could tell you. They could probably give you a good idea just by doing a visual assessment of the ductwork, but really to get to know what the improvement's going to be, you need to do that additional testing. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that's great. And Jill, I want to turn to you with two quick questions. One question has to do with a specific study, and the participant asked, what makes geothermal heat pump a more viable option in rehab versus, say, a ductless heat pump or a regular ducted heat pump? We don't often think of geothermal in a rehab. So, and then I'll ask you the second question so you can answer them both at the same time. Curious that you didn't see changes in respiratory health because we've seen those in other studies, improvements. So I'll let you comment on both.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm going to answer the second one first because that's much closer to my area of expertise. And Nate, if you can actually think about how you might answer the geothermal question, I'd appreciate it because I am no ventilation expert. So we were not able to see any changes in respiratory outcomes in this particular study, possibly because of the sample size and possibly because we did not limit enrollment to people who had respiratory issues, which makes it much harder to find a change, to tease out a change. We have, however, done some other studies that found improvements in respiratory outcomes from housing intervention. In another Minnesota green renovation, this time of a family apartment building, we saw improvements in asthma and non-asthma respiratory problems in adults and in non-asthma respiratory problems in kids. And then in King County in Seattle, we did a study where we enrolled only children with asthma, and we saw a significant improvement in asthma control due to a combination of weatherization, community health worker education, and healthy homes intervention like improved ventilation, moisture treatments, mold reduction, carpet replacement, and plumbing repairs.
Great, thanks, Jill. Nate, any commentary on the geothermal question?
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, the reason that you would want that geothermal is preferable to a standard heat pump, ductless or a regular ducted heat pump would be because the way that you're modifying the heat transfer with that system, I mean, it's too much to get into, but basically the ground temperature or the water temperature that you're using in a geothermal is going to be much more consistent, and your heat transfer is going to be a lot easier to regulate in a geothermal than a regular heat pump that's exposed to outdoor air.
Would it be fair to say, Nate, though, geothermal typically a little more expensive than air source?
Yeah, because with the geothermal, you have to do drilling or trenching, and depending on how you want to set up that system, it requires either a lot more space or a lot more money in order to install. But they definitely can increase efficiency.
Great. All right. I think we've hit a couple, not all the questions. We will have a transcript and we will send out responses to the other questions. We've just run out of time for today. I'd like to hand it back to Lael to wrap us up. Lael, you're there. Can you wrap us up?
Yes, I am. It was not letting me take
Well, sounds like he's having trouble with his audio, so why don't I just wrap us up here. We will be sending out after the webinar a recording of the presentations, and it will be available on the Health at Home website, which again, you can Google HUD Exchange Health at Home. The next session is on contaminant and pest free, where we hope to also share some additional information on reducing COVID exposures. You can, in our follow-up email, you'll get a link about how to sign up for that session. If you have more specific questions, you can reach out to Lel at the email shown here, communitycompastraining@aecom.com. That's hard to say. I want to thank everyone for their time and listening, and we look forward to you being with us again, and when everybody gets back out in the field for trying out these healthy homes practices. Again, if you have an interest in the TA training, then we'll provide you a link to access that. We'll be able to help a limited number of participating jurisdictions in refining their rehab standards to include more healthy homes practices. Thanks very much.